Good morning, Toastmasters. Nina, did you ever experience anything like the COVID-19 before? My 15-year-old grandson asked me that question about 3 months ago. He had an assignment in English, he's a ninth grader, to ask a grandparent or somebody like a grandparent that question. I hesitated when he asked me. I felt like I had been kicked in the stomach. All of a sudden, these horrible images came back to me, a nightmare. I gathered myself together and I said to him very calmly, "Yes, Andrew, I lived through something like COVID-19. It was called polio, and it was in the 1950s when I was a child, a little bit younger than you. Polio was very similar to COVID-19. It had the same symptoms. You had headaches, fever, sore throat, aching bones. It was originally called infantile paralysis, and we soon found out that it just didn't attack children, but also attacked all people, all adults, all young people. And so we started calling it modern polio. If you survived this terrible disease, and thousands of people did not, you were impacted the rest of your life in being physically disabled. The awful virus attacked the nervous system and would very frequently go and paralyze the arms and the legs of a person. And for the rest of your life, you were confined oftentimes to a wheelchair. And if you were lucky, you weren't confined to a wheelchair, but you had heavy iron braces on your legs. Let's turn the clock back to 1951. And I was 10 years old, and my brother Mickey was 11 years old. And it was the heart of the polio epidemic. And there were certain hot spots in the United States, and we happened to live in one at that time, and it was in Northwest Iowa. And so Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, this terrible disease was attacking our country and killing numerous people and impairing others. My father was a medical doctor, and he understood the danger and how horrific this disease was. And he and my mother would have a conference the beginning of every summer because this disease seemed to thrive on hot weather, and tell us what were going to be our summer plans. And we knew by the tone of his voice when he said, "Your mother and I have discussed what will happen this summer, and the news is not good." And we knew before he even said it, it was going to be another quarantine summer. And what that meant was that we were confined to be in our house, or we could go out to our front or backyard. But no contact with friends, no contact with family, certainly no use of swimming pools, no riding of bikes. And probably the two hardest things for my brother and I were that we had to take naps in the afternoon. And the other hard thing was we had to go to bed early. Can you imagine going to bed at 8:30 at night when you're 10, 11 years old? It was still light outside. And our parents were very wise people. And so what my mother did was the nap time turned into book club, where we would read books and then we would talk about them together. And my father, also being a very wise man, he said, what we'll do after supper is we'll have game night, and we'll play canasta, and we'll play cribbage, and we'll play checkers. and that would help us relax and get ready to go to bed. Things were going what we thought somewhat normal, as normal as you can be when you're quarantined at 10 and 11. When my father came home and we had our usual dinner, and he cleared his voice and in his very firm but kind way said, "Mickey and Anita, I have some bad news to tell you." And the bad news is that I just learned today that Jimmy Burns died of polio. And we were just stunned. We knew Jimmy. Jimmy was not a neighbor, but he was a classmate that went to the same school as we did. He was in 3rd grade, younger than we, and all we could do was go, "Jimmy, Jimmy, the redhead, the freckled hair kid, the friendly kid that always ran up to you in the playground and said hi?" And Dad said, "Yes, that's who I'm talking about." Needless to say, there was a lot of silence that night. We did play cards, but our hearts were not into it. And the weeks went on, and my brother and I got back into our routine. We talk about Jimmy Burns. We were sad. And then my dad, we had another night of supper. And my dad said again, and he cleared his throat and said, "Anita and Mickey, I have some sad news for you." And we froze. He said, "Oh no, please no." And what we knew was coming did come. He said, "When I made the rounds at the hospital this morning, I visited the ward where many of the children are, the children that are seriously ill with polio, the ones that are in iron lungs because they can't breathe. And I learned that our neighbor, our good friend, Jimmy Roach, died last night." And before my dad could say anything more, my brother just screamed, "No, Dad, you're wrong. You got the wrong Jimmy. It couldn't be Jimmy Roach. Jimmy and I are best friends. We're going into 7th grade. We're going to ride our bikes together to school. We're going to even try out for the football team. And I know we're both going to make it." And before again my dad could respond, I said in a very soft, sad, serious manner, "Dad, is Mickey gonna die? I don't want Mickey to die. Mickey's name isn't Jimmy. Please tell me he's not gonna die." My dad just looked at the ground and shook his head. And he came over and hugged all 3 of us. We sat at the table for a long time. And we finally decided we'd just go to bed. And none of us slept that night because we were still crying. Now let's move the clock up to the present day. When my grandson asked me that question, all that came rushing to my front of my mind was Jimmy Burns and Jimmy Roach. I had buried that deep within myself for 50 years, over 50 years. And I couldn't think of anything else for the next few days. And then finally, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. And it wasn't a light bulb, it was really like 10,000 firecrackers, rockets went off.
Yellow.
And I said to myself, I have grandchildren that are the same age as I was, and they're going through the same thing, the COVID-19. Fortunately, they haven't lost any friends, they haven't lost any family members, but they're still suffering from loss of structure, of school, of friends, of financial questions, emotional strain in the family. So I decided I'd call my children, Joni, who lives in New York City, and Michael in Chicago, and talked to them about, I had this idea. And this idea was, why didn't I play games with the kids through FaceTime or through Zoom? And if they wanted to play, but to become engaged with them, to help them. And so that's what I did. And we started having game days, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and anybody could play. And then we started having piano recitals where they would play.
Red.
Okay. And we kept engaging ourselves as much as possible. This has been a terrible time for everybody, for families. But most of all, we have learned that we are a family together. And not only do we love each other in word, but we do in deed. Thank you.